Are you like me and working very hard to try and get rid of tension in your playing? Well, of course, one of the major causes of tension is when we stretch our hands. So stay tuned for some ideas of how we can minimize this. Are you sitting comfortably? Then let's begin. Hi, this is Tommy with Tommy's Piano Corner, the place for returning pianists, or indeed anybody who loves piano, to share tips and ideas of how to get the best from this great hobby. If it's your first trip here, then please do think about subscribing. Simply click the little icon in the bottom right hand corner of your screen now, and it's all done for you. Being a pianist with smaller hands means for a lot of repertoire, then I actually need to stretch my hands quite a lot to be able to play it. Larger-handed pianists perhaps can reach that little bit further without needing to stretch quite so much. But even the biggest of hands still need to be able to stretch out to play some music, which is sort of unavoidable, isn't it? However, the problem with stretching is it causes tension. I mean, just try this for yourself. Simply take your hand and stretch it out and stretch your fingers out. Hold it there, and in no time at all, you'll start to feel the tension grow. It'll build up across the top of your hand and even down into your arm, and you can feel the tightness in the muscles and tendons here. I remember in a Josh Wright video that Josh was saying that Sergei Babayan had advised him to start avoiding open hand positions. And Josh has got big hands when he plays, but the idea is even if you have big hands, if you keep them stretched all the time, ultimately it adds tension into your playing no matter how good you are. Let's not forget that for our hands, there's a sort of a natural resting position where the least amount of muscular effort is being used to keep your hand in the same place. And when you're like this, you're using less effort. As soon as you depart from that, then you're going to need to use more muscular effort just to remain in that position. I've noticed that I have a tendency to frequently play with open hand positions when really they're just not necessary. I think, for example, if we're playing something that has a repeating pattern of notes, then our sort of natural tendency is to think it's easier to keep our hands open so that the fingers remain in position for when they're next needed to play in that pattern. Take, for example, in Saint-Saëns' The Swan, the Salotti arrangement. My natural tendency has always been to play this with more open hand positions, sort of a little bit like this. However, this means that my fingers remain outstretched. Okay, maybe not for long enough to actually cause a lot of tension, but certainly for a lot longer than they need to be. So by simply modifying the fingering ever so slightly, you'll find it's possible to let that hand close up much more often when you're playing this piece. So a bit more like this. And you'll find that this type of pattern appears right the way through the piece, of course. Think, for example, of the first movement of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. When you're generally taught to play this, you're taught to keep the left hand nice and legato by holding the octaves and even changing fingers between 5 and 4 so that you're able to maintain the legato. However, if your hands are so small that to play an octave is a stretch, then maintaining throughout this entire piece your hands constantly stretched out is not really a very wise way to play it. And perhaps some people will disagree with me and they'll say, oh no, the legato absolutely must be maintained. But the reality is that even pianists with bigger hands that maintain legato in their fingers, they're also maintaining it through the pedal. So therefore you do have options of releasing that stretch whilst you're playing this piece. You could, for example, simply lift your hand and let it close between each octave. Alternatively, rather than keeping both notes held down, play both notes together, then perhaps lift your thumb, close your hand, but keep the bottom note held until the next octave plays. Playing like this, of course, means that your hand is spending less time outstretched and your muscles are getting time to relax between notes. Even in faster music, stretching can still be an issue. Let's take, for example, the 8th note section of Chopin C-sharp minor waltz. Now here, you've got the stretch both between the pinky and the thumb, but also for me, you've frequently got a little bit of a stretch between fingers 2 and 3 when playing this. And again, I think, especially because it's a little bit faster, a natural tendency might be to keep the fingers in position so that we think it's going to be easier to play. However, this is not the case, as playing with tension is always more difficult than playing with a perfectly relaxed hand. So, to get around this problem, we have a couple of options really. We can use elliptical movements of the right hand as we're playing. We can use more side-to-side movements of the hand as it's playing. And of course, this means that we're able to reach further without needing to stretch our fingers quite so much. Additionally, of course, we can consciously train ourselves to close our hand up as we play and to only stretch out for the outlying notes a split second before we need to play them. And while we're on the topic of stretching, perhaps one thing I've noticed that is sort of the reverse of it is the effect of squeezing your hand whilst you're playing. I noticed this whilst I was watching a recording of myself playing Debussy's First Arabesque, one of my regular practice recordings. I've never been that happy with the way I've played this particular section, and I was trying to work out why is it not quite as smooth as I want. And I noticed that in fact my hand was staying sort of squeezed up whilst I was playing this section rather than being just in its normal position. Now think about this, even try it yourself, put your thumb under and then see if how much movement you've got in your fingers and thumb when you're in that position, and you'll see that it's restricted. And that of course means that to play smoothly would become more difficult. A better way, of course, to play this is to imagine that the thumb needs to play another note outside whilst you're doing that, so that it comes from underneath the palm to the side and then only goes back again when you're coming down the arpeggio. I think it's definitely worthwhile paying attention to this and watching how often you keep your hands in an open position when perhaps you could play from a more closed position. Over time, I'm sure this will then become an automatic reflex and will help us to largely eradicate at least one source of tension in our playing. If you're not already, then please do subscribe to Tommy's Piano Corner. Don't forget to click the little bell icon so you're notified of new videos as and when they're released. I thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you very soon.